Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video, we'll be looking at the evidence for evolution, particularly evidence provided by fossils. If you've been enjoying these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, comment below and let me know what you've learnt. So let's get going. Fossils are the remains of plants or animals that no longer exist. They have been preserved in rock or ice or other places like bogs. Fossils can be formed when an animal or a plant does not decay after it has died. This is because one or more of the factors needed for decay is absent. For example, the animal has died in an area where there is little or no oxygen, like a bog or a muddy riverbed, and so bacteria are not present and they cannot decompose the body. Bogs are often acidic, which also kills bacteria and prevents decomposition. Poisonous gases may have killed off bacteria, preventing decay and decomposition, and temperatures may be too low for decay to occur. Remember that bacteria work fastest at around 35 to 40 degrees. So let's look at a few examples of this then. On the left here, we have the La Brea tar pits in California, and they are a very good source of fossils as the tar prevented decay and preserved the animals that died. In many cases, these are prehistoric animals such as the woolly mammoths that you can see in the picture above. A famous example from the UK is the so-called Lindo peat or peat marsh, occasionally known as boggy marsh. And he was a human that was murdered and thrown into a bog around 2 BC. The lack of oxygen meant that decay did not really happen. Now, around 2,000 years later, that same bog was being dug up and used as a source of peat. And peat is a fossil fuel that you can burn in houses to produce warmth and heat. And so his skeleton was discovered in a remarkably preserved condition, as you can see here. His skin is still preserved, and you can even sort of see hair and clothes preserved on his body, even after 2,000 years of decomposition. Another example is this baby woolly mammoth, which was preserved in the ice when it died in Siberia, and with low temperatures slowed and preserved decay. So this mammoth is over 10-15,000 years old. So fossils can be formed when animals or plants do not decay, and this is because one or more factors needed for decay is absent. So very occasionally, an animal or a plant is almost perfectly preserved. And these fossils provide information on what the organism looked like. They can reveal information about what the animal may have been eating, or even the colour of its skin, or indeed the colour of a flower if a flower has been perfectly preserved. DNA may be able to be extracted and compared to modern species to give more information about the evolutionary relationships. And that's what's happening with the study of this almost perfectly preserved woolly mammoth from Siberia. So, how can fossils actually be formed? Well, one of the most common methods is by a process known as mineralisation. And you can see the steps involved in mineralisation in this diagram. Firstly, in this case, a reptile, a triceratops, has died and it's fallen to the ground. Its flesh is rotted away, leaving the skeleton to be covered in sand or soil and clay before the skeleton gets damaged. The skeleton is therefore protected over millions of years. The skeleton becomes mineralised and turns to rock, and the rock shifts in earth with the fossil trapped inside. Eventually, processes like erosion will allow the fossil to emerge as rocks move and the erosion takes place. So how could we explain that in a more exam-friendly manner? Well, often during fossilization, fossils are formed when the harder parts of animals or plants are replaced by minerals as they decay. This is actually examples of displacement reactions from chemistry. And this can preserve the harder parts of the animal, for example the bones and the shell, and this process is called mineralisation. But mineralised fossils are not the only type of fossils that we have available to us as scientists. Another example of fossils are the mould fossils, and these are formed when an impression of an organism is made in the mud and then it becomes fossilised. Another type of fossil are the cast fossils, one you can see here. Cast fossils are made when a mould fills up with minerals and therefore preserves the shape of a mould even when the mould itself erodes away. Some fossils may even be preserved traces that were left behind. For example, you may have fossilised droppings, fossilised burrows, fossilised footprints, and rootlet traces of fossilised plants. However, the fossil record is incomplete. The fossil record does provide very powerful evidence for evolution, and some species like the horse have an almost complete fossil record showing their evolutionary history. However, for most species, the fossil record is incomplete. And the fossil record is incomplete for several reasons. Many of the earliest life forms were soft-bodied organisms, and they have left few fossil traces. We do not have a record of some of the earliest forms of life. The majority of fossils formed in the earliest days will have been destroyed by geological activity, including continental movements, subduction zones, erosion, volcanic action, and earthquakes. And this is why scientists cannot be certain of how life on Earth began. Most organisms that die don't become fossilised. The right conditions for fossilisation are very rare. And we haven't yet found all the fossils that are there to be found. There are many still to be found, so we don't have a complete record of the evolutionary history for every species that we know to exist. Despite this, the fossils that have been found can still give you a lot of information about life millions of years ago, and the fossils provide evidence for plate tectonics and for evolution. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video on fossils as evidence for evolution. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment below to let me know what you've learned. Thank you very much for your time.